"Grandpa, Mom, and Dad are going to take your savings after the get-together today," my 7-year-old granddaughter Chloe whispered. Her words hit me like a massive wave, completely destroying the illusion of family devotion. I, a trusting patriarch who had always supported them, left early, concealing my astonishment behind a facade of being tired. But what I did next, a clever strategy for dealing with their treachery, stunned everyone. I beat them at their own scheme, and it's a lesson they'll never forget. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. I know what you're imagining, Dad, but just listen. Mark's voice was strained over the phone, tearing through the Sunday morning stillness like a dull knife. I almost dropped my ceramic mug. Calls at 7:30 a.m. weren't Mark's style, especially not with that shaky tone I remembered from his late teens when he'd damaged my classic utility vehicle. "What seems off, son?" I leaned back against my kitchen counter, watching the vapors swirl from my herbal tea while the morning sun painted bright squares across yesterday's untouched magazine. "Well, Sarah really wants. We both believe you absolutely have to come to Chloe's 9th birthday party this afternoon." The words burst out too quickly, as if he'd rehearsed them but lost the timing. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Since when did they need to talk me into seeing my granddaughter? Mark, when have I ever skipped one of Chloe's birthdays? No, that's not it. A slight pause. I heard what sounded like Sarah's voice in the background, sharp and firm. "It's just that Sarah has been arranging this for weeks, and she specifically requested I call and confirm you're coming." I stirred my tea slowly, watching the amber liquid mix. Sarah specifically asking? The same Sarah who typically treated my presence like an unavoidable hassle. That's thoughtful of her. "Yeah, she's really looking forward to it." Mark's chuckle sounded fake, hollow. "The party begins at 3:00, but maybe you could arrive a bit early. We wanted to talk about some household matters." My metal spoon clinked against the mug as I placed it down. Household matters? In 5 years of being a widower, household matters had never necessitated special talks. What kind of household matters? "Oh, just organizing things, future plans. Sarah has some concepts for how we can all be more involved with one another." I walked to the window, the phone pressed to my ear, watching Mrs. Olson across the street tend to her terracotta pots. Sarah with concepts about family involvement? The woman who'd spent last Thanksgiving dinner checking her tablet every 5 minutes. That sounds pleasant, Mark. I kept my voice neutral, but my decades of experience as a consultant were screaming. 20 years of assessing people across negotiation tables had trained me to recognize when someone was promoting something they didn't personally buy into. "Wonderful. So, you'll be there early, maybe around 2:30? I glanced at the message board where Chloe's latest doodle hung beside my grocery list. A wobbly lighthouse with stick figures labeled Grandpa, Daddy, Mommy, and me, drawn with a violet marker. That child was the greatest light in my existence since Joyce passed. Naturally, I'll be there early. I wouldn't miss Chloe's day for anything. Perfect. And Dad, Mark's voice dropped lower. Just be receptive to what we want to discuss, okay? It's all about making sure everyone is provided for." The connection ended before I could ask what he meant by "everyone is provided for." I stared at the phone for a long moment, then placed it on the counter next to my untouched magazine. Something was wrong. Mark's voice had that identical guilty undertone I recalled from when he was 10 and had borrowed a $20 bill from Joyce's jewelry box for a video game. But this felt larger than childish misbehavior. I poured fresh tea and tried to dismiss the anxiety. Perhaps Sarah genuinely wanted to improve family ties. Perhaps I was overthinking a simple invitation. But as I sat back down, I couldn't stop thinking about that phrase. Making sure everyone is provided for. In my experience, when people started discussing providing for everyone, they usually meant providing for themselves first. I looked at Chloe's lighthouse drawing again and smiled despite my concerns. Whatever Mark and Sarah had planned to discuss, it could wait until after I'd celebrated my granddaughter's 9th birthday. Some things were more important than adult complexities. Still, I made a note to carefully observe whatever they wished to talk about. Preparations and suspicions. 15 minutes later, I stood in my dressing room, looking at sweaters Joyce would never see me wear again. The gray cashmere recalled her memorial service, how Sarah had whispered about all the space while we buried my wife. Even then, something in her tone had felt calculating. I took the sweater from its hanger and noticed my reflection in the mirror. $85,000. That's what I'd given them over the past 5 years. Condominium fees, tuition for Mark's night classes, Chloe's private dance lessons. Joyce would have called it extravagant, but she'd also understood that Chloe deserved better than her parents could manage alone. My bifold wallet felt heavy in my back pocket as I got dressed. 2 debit cards were drained for Mark's emergencies. The crucial boiler replacement that became a full HVAC system overhaul, Sarah's short-term need for petty cash that turned into a monthly expectation. Each request delivered with Mark's ashamed explanations and Sarah's perfectly timed thanks. Walking to the kitchen for my keychain, I passed the message board where Chloe's latest drawing hung beside my grocery list. She'd drawn our last hiking trip. 2 stick figures by a brown marker path, both smiling. "Best weekend ever, Grandpa," was written in violet marker along the bottom. That's when Sarah's recent remark hit me with new clarity. 4 weeks ago, standing in this exact spot, she surveyed my kitchen and said, "Robert, don't you think this residence is becoming too large for you? There are wonderful retirement apartments where you wouldn't have to fret over upkeep." Mark had quickly changed the subject to Chloe's chess club, but Sarah's eyes had lingered on my quartz countertops, the high-end appliances Joyce and I had picked out together, the same calculating gaze she'd worn at the funeral. I grabbed my keys from the counter, recalling Joyce's last conscious words. "Promise me you'll always care for Chloe, but be vigilant with Mark. He's easily influenced, and easily influenced people make poor choices when someone stronger is advising them." At the time, I thought she meant his poker buddies or quick money schemes. Now, I wondered if Joyce had seen something in Sarah that I'd overlooked. The way she'd started every conversation about money with Chloe's needs, making me feel irresponsible for questioning the expenditures. The garage door mechanism hummed as morning light streamed across my sedan. Joyce's car still sat in her designated spot, covered and spotless. I'd kept making the payments on it for months after her passing, unable to admit she was truly gone. Perhaps that's what they were counting on. My inability to say no when it involved family. The grandfather who'd rather pay than disappoint, who'd rather believe than investigate. But 40 years as a consultant had taught me to audit the details before signing anything significant. I backed out of the driveway slowly, watching my house diminish in the side mirror. By this evening, after whatever talk Mark and Sarah had planned, I suspected I'd view everything differently. For now, I needed to buy my granddaughter a birthday present, something unique, perhaps the last gift I'd give her before everything changed. The Central Plaza shops were bustling with Sunday morning activity as I parked near the main entry. 8:45, and already families were heading toward the children's toy stores. Perfect timing for Chloe's gifts. The model kit section immediately drew my attention. Chloe had been fascinated by engineering since her school trip to the Great Clock Tower last month. The Sydney Opera House kit caught my eye, detailed enough to challenge her developing skills, but not overwhelming. $190 seemed appropriate for something that would engage her inquisitive mind for weeks. "Fantastic selection, sir," the young clerk said with a smile as he rang up my purchase. "My nephew loves this series. Would you like it gift-wrapped?" "Yes, please. It's for my granddaughter's 9th birthday." Next stop, sports equipment. Chloe had mentioned wanting a proper scooter, not the flimsy plastic one she'd outgrown. The Voyager brand model near the window looked ideal. A lightweight platform, grip brakes she could handle, and LED lights for visibility. $340, but her happy face would be worth every cent. Loading the scooter box into my sedan, I checked my wristwatch. 9:40. Plenty of time for one more stop. Robert. What a delightful surprise. Alice Olson appeared beside my car holding a bag from the stationery shop. My neighbor of 10 years looked genuinely pleased to see me, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "Alice, good morning. Starting your weekend errands early. Oh, you know me. I like avoiding the crowds. She gestured toward the shop entrance. "Though I suppose you're here for party preparations. Mark mentioned Chloe's gathering when I saw him last week." "He mentioned it?" I closed the sedan's rear hatch, curious. "Where did you cross paths with him?" "At the city library, actually. Wednesday morning, I believe it was. Sarah was with him, and they were leaving the Metropolitan Credit Union with quite a stack of folders." Alice gave a small laugh. Looked very official and serious. Likely just arranging a loan, the way young people do these days. Wednesday. 4 days ago. Mark hadn't mentioned any credit union business during his anxious phone call this morning. But then again, why would he? People handled financial matters constantly without publicizing the details. "Probably just a routine matter," I said, shifting my shopping bags to my other hand. "Of course, dear. None of my business anyway." Alice patted my arm kindly. "Well, I'd better let you finish your shopping. Give my best to that sweet granddaughter of yours." She hurried away toward the stationery shop, leaving me standing beside my car with a faint sense of disquiet. Credit union business on Wednesday, nervous phone call on Sunday. The timing felt strangely related. But then again, Mark always seemed to be dealing with some financial snag or another. I shook off the feeling and headed toward the gift shop near the shop's north entrance. Sarah had always appreciated decorative candles and a set of ivory. Unscented ones would make a thoughtful gesture for the hostess of Chloe's party. The shop attendant, a middle-aged woman with flair for interior decorating, wrapped a dozen tall candles in copper-colored paper with practiced skill. "These are charming," she said, adjusting the ribbon. "Special occasion. My granddaughter's birthday party. They're for her mother. How considerate. She'll adore them. $35 for candles that would be gone in a month, but Sarah's approving look would be worth the cost." These small courtesies mattered in preserving family peace, especially when subtle tensions existed. By tent crew, my sedan was loaded with packages that represented nearly $700 of birthday celebration. The model kit, scooter, candles, and the card I'd chosen, each item selected with Chloe's happiness in mind. This was what grandfathers did. They spoiled their grandchildren openly and cherished every second of it. Driving home through Sunday morning traffic, I found myself contemplating Alice's casual observation. Mark and Sarah at the credit union with folders, serious expressions, official business that Mark hadn't bothered to mention. But then again, married couples handled countless routine tasks without involving extended family. Account updates, a refinancing plan, a savings fund for Chloe. Any number of legitimate reasons could account for their downtown visit. Still, as I turned into my driveway, I couldn't quite dismiss the faint suspicion in my head that wondered why Mark had sounded so stressed this morning if everything was truly as routine as it seemed. After wrapping Chloe's gifts and having a quick snack, I arrived at Mark's home precisely at 3 Who. The front door swung open before I could touch the chime. "Robert!" Sarah practically sang my name, her arms spread wide as if we hadn't seen each other in years rather than weeks. "You look absolutely dashing today." This enthusiasm felt unnatural. Sarah usually offered a polite nod and a brief embrace before vanishing into hosting duties. Today, she touched my forearm twice while speaking, her eyes shining with an intensity I'd never seen directed at me before. "Thank you. Sarah, the gathering looks superb." I stepped inside, carrying the wrapped scooter box and the gift bag containing the model kit. Bright ribbons hung from every entrance and balloon bunches filled each corner, far more lavish than previous birthday events. "Dad, there he is." Mark emerged from the main room, his voice booming across the house like a ringmaster's. "Come meet Greg from the office." "Greg, this is my wonderful father I've talked about so much." Wonderful father. Mark's work conversations about me usually focused on my outdated methods or my reluctance to retire. But today, he clapped my shoulder with theatrical gusto, his laughter echoing too loudly in the decorated passage. The main room buzzed with familiar faces. The Miller family from next door chatted near the stone hearth, while Mrs. Davis sat cautiously on the sofa, scrutinizing everything with keen eyes. Miguel and Eliza Soto helped their son, Leo, arrange table games on the side table. Grandpa, Chloe ran towards me, her authentic smile cutting through the artificial atmosphere like a spotlight. She wrapped her arms around my waist, and for a moment, the world felt right again. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." I handed her the gift bag. This one first, then the big surprise. She unwrapped the Sydney Opera House model kit with delicate fingers, her eyes widening at the engineering blueprint image on the box. But when she looked up to thank me, something flickered across her face, a trace of gloom that vanished when Sarah approached. "Isn't Grandpa generous, darling? Say thank you properly. Thank you, Grandpa. It's really neat." Chloe's voice carried genuine appreciation mixed with something else: apprehension, distress. A 9-year-old shouldn't sound so burdened during her own birthday party. Mark led me towards the conservatory, where Greg Palmer was nursing a cold drink and making small talk about financial trading. The conversation flowed normally enough, but Mark kept interjecting with unnecessary praise about my business acumen and moral character. Each comment felt rehearsed, like lines from a script he'd poorly committed to memory. "Robert understands everything about forging successful partnerships," Mark announced to Greg. "He's taught me so much about integrity and familial dedication." Integrity and familial dedication. Odd subjects for a casual party chat, especially delivered with Mark's current frantic intensity. Greg nodded politely, clearly uncomfortable with Mark's excessive admiration for his own father. Sarah reappeared with a platter of small pastries, placing herself between me and the other guests. "Robert, you simply must sample these tarts. I made them, specifically considering your refined palate." My refined palate? Sarah had never paid attention to my food preferences beyond ensuring sufficient quantities appeared at family meals. Now she hovered beside me, topping up my juice glass before it emptied, and asking about my comfort every few minutes. From across the room, I watched Chloe opening cards from school friends. Her movement seemed automatic, courteous, but distant. When Leo Soto asked about her new model kit, she nodded and smiled appropriately, but her responses lacked the genuine excitement I'd expected. "She's maturing so fast," Mrs. Davis observed, settling beside me on the sofa. "Such an introspective child. She asked me last week if grandparents and their children ever disagree about important decisions." My juice glass paused halfway to my lips. "What did you tell her?" "That families resolve differences with kindness and openness." Mrs. Davis studied Chloe with worried eyes, appearing troubled by something beyond normal childhood concerns. Across the room, Mark and Sarah exchanged a quick look, the kind of silent communication that suggested collaboration. They'd been doing that all afternoon, I realized. Brief eye contact, subtle nods, perfectly timed interruptions when conversations approached sensitive topics. The afternoon dragged on with forced gaiety and meticulous direction. Every smile felt deliberate, every laugh slightly too loud, every display of family affection performed for an audience. Only Chloe's conduct toward me remained authentic, though overshadowed by whatever burden she carried. As the party drew to a close and guests began collecting their belongings, Mark caught my attention with an overly casual gesture. "Dad, stick around after everyone goes, okay? Sarah and I have been looking forward to that family discussion we brought up." The manufactured cheerfulness began weighing on me like humidity before a squall. I excused myself with a polite smile, mentioning the powder room down the hallway. Sarah immediately jumped up, offering directions I didn't need, her concern feeling rehearsed rather than sincere. Walking away from the party noise, I noticed Chloe watching me from beside the gift counter. Something in her expression, worry mixed with resolve, made me pause. When I reached the hallway lined with framed photos, small footsteps followed behind me. "Grandpa?" Her voice barely rose above a murmur. I turned to find her glancing back toward the main room, ensuring we were alone. The birthday girl, who should have been radiant with excitement, looked instead like she carried the entire world on her 9-year-old shoulders. "What is it, sweetheart?" I knelt to her eye level, recognizing the serious expression she'd inherited from Joyce. "You look troubled." She bit her lower lip, a mannerism that reminded me painfully of her grandmother during difficult talks. "I need to tell you something important about Mom and Dad." My chest tightened. What about them, honey? They're planning to take your savings tonight. The words tumbled out quickly as if she'd been practicing them. After everyone heads home, I heard them talking last night when I was supposed to be sleeping. The hallway seemed to sway slightly. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself, fighting to keep my expression calm for her sake. What exactly did you hear? Mom said, "You have too much money for an old man living by himself." Chloe's voice dropped even lower. She told Dad they were going to fix that problem tonight. Dad seemed scared, but Mom said the documents from the credit union would make everything legal. Documents from the credit union. Wednesday's visit that Alice Olson had mentioned suddenly made terrible sense. My consultant instincts, dormant for years, roared back to life with piercing clarity. Did they say anything else? I asked gently, though my mind raced with implications I hoped a 9-year-old couldn't comprehend. Dad kept saying, "What if he finds out?" And Mom said it would be too late by then. Tears welled in her eyes. "Grandpa, I don't want them to take your money. You're the only one who truly notices me." I pulled her into a fierce embrace, feeling her small body tremble against mine. Joyce's granddaughter, burdened with adult secrets that no child should bear. The betrayal cut deeper, knowing they'd planned this within earshot of innocent ears. "Listen to me carefully," I whispered into her hair. "You did the right thing telling me. But we need to keep this our secret for now. Okay, can you do that?" She nodded against my shoulder. "Are you going to stop them?" "Yes, sweetheart. I'm going to take care of everything." I held her at arm's length, ensuring she could see the certainty in my eyes. "But we need to go back to your party now and act normal. Can you be brave for me?" "I think so." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "Will you still love me if Mom and Dad get upset?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "Chloe, nothing your parents do could ever change how much I love you. Nothing. Do you understand?" Relief flooded her face, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all afternoon. "I love you too, Grandpa." Hand in hand, we walked back toward the party sounds, but everything had changed in those few whispered minutes. The son I'd raised, the daughter-in-law I'd supported, the family I'd trusted with my heart, all of it now viewed through the lens of calculated deception. As we rejoined the celebration, I caught Mark's eye across the room. He smiled and waved, the same false enthusiasm that had puzzled me earlier. Now, I understood exactly what that performance was designed to accomplish. Returning to the party felt like walking onto a stage where everyone else had forgotten they were acting. I settled back into conversations with the natural ease that 40 years of business negotiations had taught me, while internally cataloging every glance between Mark and Sarah with devastating new clarity. Mrs. Davis was discussing her garden when I noticed Mark checking his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. Sarah appeared beside him immediately, their brief eye contact now obviously coordinated rather than coincidental. They were monitoring me, I realized, ensuring I stayed comfortable, engaged, and, most importantly, present for whatever they had planned after the guests departed. "Robert, how about some more juice?" Sarah's hand touched my arm with practiced concern. "You look a bit drained. Are you feeling all right?" "Drained? Yes, I probably was. Learning that your family plans to steal your life savings might do that to a person. But I managed a tired smile that wasn't entirely manufactured. Just a slight tension headache, but I'm fine." Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the kind of micro-expression I'd learned to read in boardroom adversaries. Relief mixed with calculation. A tired, slightly unwell grandfather would be easier to manipulate than an alert one. For the next hour, I played my role perfectly: gracious grandfather, generous family head, aging man, perhaps not quite as sharp as he once was. I accepted their attentions, praised their hospitality, and observed their increasingly obvious collaboration with the detached interest of studying a chess opponent's strategy. Mark kept steering conversations away from financial matters. Whenever guests mentioned the stock market or retirement planning, Sarah redirected discussions about my house, my health, my future living arrangements. They were managing the information flow, ensuring nothing conflicted with whatever narrative they'd constructed for tonight's important family discussion. Around 6:30, as afternoon shadows lengthened and guests began collecting their belongings, I announced my intention to leave. I think I should head home early. This headache isn't improving. The effect was immediate. Mark and Sarah exchanged a look of genuine alarm. "Dad, wait." Mark moved to block my path to the door. "We really wanted to talk about those important family matters we mentioned. Remember? You promised to stay after everyone left." "Perhaps another time," I said, maintaining the weary grandfather persona. "I really need to rest." "But Robert," Sarah stepped closer, her voice taking on urgent undertones. "We have something critical planned for tonight, something we've been preparing for weeks. Something they'd been preparing for weeks." The credit union visit Alice Olson witnessed. Legal documents, plans that required my presence and cooperation. I could see the desperation creeping into their performance as their carefully orchestrated timeline threatened to collapse. "I'm sure it can wait until tomorrow," I replied gently. "Our family isn't going anywhere." Mark's face flushed. "Actually, Dad, there are some time-sensitive matters we need to discuss. Capital affairs that can't be delayed." Capital affairs that can't be delayed. How interesting that Mark would phrase it exactly that way. I filed the comment away with all the other intelligence I'd gathered throughout this surreal afternoon. "Tomorrow. Son, I promise." I turned toward Chloe, who had been watching our exchange with worried eyes. Kneeling to her level, I pulled her into what might be our last innocent embrace before everything changed. "Thank you for the most wonderful birthday party, sweetheart." "Thank you for my presents, Grandpa." Her small arms tightened around my neck. "I love you so much." "I love you too, more than you'll ever know," I whispered against her ear, quiet enough that only she could hear. "Everything will be okay." Standing, I felt Mark's hand on my shoulder heavier than necessary, almost restraining. "Dad, please just give us an hour. 1 hour to discuss these important family decisions." I looked into my son's eyes and saw not the boy I'd raised, but a desperate man whose greed had overwhelmed whatever love remained. The realization cut deeper than I'd expected, but my voice remained steady. "Another time, Mark. I need to go home now." Walking to my car while they watched from the doorway, Sarah whispering urgently in Mark's ear, both of them radiating frustrated tension, I felt the weight of the performance finally lifting from my shoulders. Alone in my sedan, I sat for a moment in their driveway, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. My family had planned to rob me tonight with legal documents and careful preparation. Starting the engine, I pulled away from the house where I had celebrated what might be my last normal family gathering. Inside my house, the silence felt different than it had that morning. No longer peaceful, but charged with purpose. I walked directly to my home study, the room where I'd built my consulting business from a single desk and stubborn determination. 40 years of important documents lived in the wall, safe behind Joyce's portrait. As I spun the combination lock, muscle memory from decades of business dealings guided my fingers. 25. 1961, Joyce's anniversary date. The irony wasn't lost on me that her memory would help me protect what we'd built together. The documents told a story I'd been too trusting to read properly. Brokerage statements revealing the pattern of financial requests that had escalated from hundreds to thousands over 5 years. Investment portfolios worth far more than Mark or Sarah realized. Title deeds for commercial units they didn't know existed. And most importantly, records of every payment I'd made to support their lifestyle. 247 individual transfers. I documented everything with the methodical precision that had made my business successful. Condominium fees, vehicle repairs, hospital bills, private dance lesson tuition for Chloe. Each payment justified by some family urgency or opportunity that seemed reasonable at the time. Sitting at my desk with Joyce's photo watching from the shelf, I finally saw the manipulation clearly. The escalating requests had been conditioning, training me to say yes to increasingly larger amounts. Sarah's suggestions about retirement apartments weren't concern for my welfare. They were reconnaissance for tonight's planned theft. Every condominium fee, every tuition check, I said aloud to Joyce's photograph. They've been planning this for months. My phone sat silent on the desk. Mark and Sarah would be scrambling right now, trying to figure out how to proceed without me present for their important family discussion. The thought gave me a grim satisfaction. Opening my business card file, I found Charles Dixon's personal number. 20 years of friendship and professional respect with the chief financial officer of Metropolitan Credit Union. Charles would remember the careful, detail-oriented consultant who'd never missed a payment or broken a promise. More importantly, he'd understand exactly what legal documents obtained under false pretenses actually meant. The clock showed 10:30 p.m., too late for business calls, but I made a note for tomorrow morning. First priority, understanding exactly what papers Mark and Sarah had obtained and how to neutralize their legal effectiveness. Next, I reviewed my last will and testament and trust documents, standard arrangements that left everything to Mark with provisions for Chloe's education and future, written when I still believed my son possessed integrity and love for his family rather than simply greed for our money. Those documents would need immediate revision. Elizabeth Vance had notarized most of my legal paperwork over the years, independent, discreet, and unconnected to any credit union where Mark and Sarah might have allies. Another call for tomorrow morning. Spreading the brokerage statements across my desk like battle maps, I calculated my actual net worth for the first time in years. $3.5 million in liquid assets, plus 3 commercial units, plus this house with no mortgage. Far more than Mark and Sarah suspected, and certainly more than they could steal in one evening's legal maneuvering. Elizabeth Vance answered on the second ring. "Robert, good evening. What can I do for you?" "Elizabeth, I need notary services tomorrow morning for some family financial documents. Could you come to my house around 10? "Of course. What type of documents are we dealing with?" I chose my words carefully. "Proxy directive forms. It might be a somewhat sensitive family matter, so I'd appreciate your professional discretion. You know you can count on that. I'll bring my seal and journal." Perfect. Elizabeth had notarized dozens of contracts for my consulting business over the years. She'd recognize irregular pressure tactics or coercion immediately. It was part of her professional training. Next call. Charles Dixon. "Charles, could you stop by tomorrow morning around 10 whoos? I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I'd like to review my portfolio in detail." "Certainly, Robert. After what we discussed about wealth management assistance, I think a thorough review would be wise." "Excellent. It might be educational," Charles chuckled. "I'll bring the necessary paperwork. See you at 10. Educational indeed." Charles would witness whatever Mark and Sarah planned to do, and as a chief financial officer, he'd understand exactly what he was seeing. More importantly, his presence would add legal weight to any documentation of their behavior. Final call. "Mark," I let my voice carry the tremulous uncertainty I'd performed that afternoon. "Mark, I've been thinking about those papers you brought. You were right. I do need help managing things." "Dad, that's wonderful. Sarah will be so relieved. We can come over first thing tomorrow morning. I've arranged for a notary to make everything proper and legal. 10 nanong sharp, perfect. And Dad, thank you for trusting us with this." Trust. The word sat bitter in my mouth, but I managed to sound grateful. "You're my family. Of course, I trust you." After hanging up, I walked to the window overlooking my backyard. Joyce's rock garden needed attention, another task I'd been managing alone since her death. Tomorrow would determine whether I'd continue managing it as a free man or watch it wither from some care facility while Mark and Sarah divided our life's work. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and wrote down the sequence of events I expected. Tomorrow, 2:45 a.m. Elizabeth arrives. Sets up notary materials, 2 a.m. Charles arrives with portfolio documents, 10:05 a.m. Mark and Sarah arrive expecting easy document signing. 10 a.m. Professional witnesses observe their manipulation tactics. 10:15 a.m. The truth emerges. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. They'd researched how to steal my autonomy through legal procedures, but they'd forgotten that legal procedures require proper witnesses and documentation. Tomorrow, those same requirements would expose their betrayal. 20 miles across town, Mark was probably explaining to Sarah how cooperative I'd sounded, how the notary would make everything official, how close they were to controlling millions of dollars. They'd celebrate tonight, confident that a confused old man had finally accepted their help. They had no idea they were walking into a trap set by the same business mind that had built what they were trying to steal. I looked at Chloe's drawing on my message board, our stick-figure family standing beside a wobbly lighthouse. Tomorrow would determine whether that little girl grew up with grandparents who protected her, or parents who taught her that family loyalty could be bought and sold. Joyce's voice echoed from 5 years ago. "Promise me you'll always care for Chloe." I intended to keep that promise. The confrontation Monday morning arrived gray and cold. I slept little that night, but when Elizabeth arrived at 9:45 with her notary seal and journal, I felt completely prepared. "Good morning, Robert. Beautiful home study," she said, arranging her materials on the side table. "This should be straightforward." Charles knocked precisely at 10 equers, carrying his banker's portfolio. "Morning, Robert. Ready for that portfolio review?" "More ready than you know," I replied, positioning myself behind my desk as footsteps approached the front door. Mark and Sarah entered with confident smiles and their leather document case. They paused when they saw Elizabeth and Charles, but Sarah recovered quickly. "How thoughtful of you to arrange professional assistance," she said smoothly. "This will make everything so much more official." "Indeed, it will," I replied, my voice carrying none of yesterday's confused frailty. "Please, everyone, take a seat." Mark settled into the chair across from my desk, still smiling. "Dad, you sound much better today. More like your old self." "Exactly like my old self. Sharp, observant, capable." I leaned forward, meeting his eyes directly. "Which is why I need to tell you something before we sign any documents." Sarah's pen stopped moving across her checklist. "Robert, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong with me, Sarah, but I'm completely aware of your plan." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Mark's smile faltered. "Dad, what plan?" "We're here to help you. I know about your visit to Charles's credit union last Wednesday. I know about the guardianship procedures you researched. I know about the mental capacity assessments you plan to arrange." Mark's face drained of color. Sarah's carefully controlled expression cracked for just a moment before she attempted damage control. "Robert, you're confused. We visited the credit union about our own financial planning." "Charles," I interrupted, turning to my friend, "would you mind sharing what they discussed during their Wednesday afternoon appointment?" Charles cleared his throat professionally. They asked detailed questions about supervision protocols, documentation requirements for declaring someone mentally unfit, and accelerated judicial processes for emergency financial management. Elizabeth looked up from her notary journal, suddenly alert. "Mr. Price, are you saying these proxy directive documents were prepared under false pretenses?" "I'm saying they planned to have me declared incompetent so they could steal everything I've worked 40 years to build." Mark found his voice, though it came out strangled. "Dad, we were worried about you. Yesterday you seemed so confused. Yesterday I was performing. Today you're seeing who I really am." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the documentation I'd prepared. 247 transfers over 5 years, $85,000 in support payments, every condominium fee, every vehicle repair, every private dance lesson tuition bill, all documented. Sarah leaned forward, desperation creeping into her voice. "Those were legitimate family expenses." "Conditioning payments," I corrected, training me to say yes to increasingly larger amounts until I'd agreed to sign away my autonomy. I looked directly at her. "You researched exactly how to have me confined while you divided my assets." Elizabeth set down her pen. "This is highly irregular. I need to understand the full situation before notarizing anything." "The full situation," I continued, "is that my son and daughter-in-law spent weeks researching legal procedures to steal my money, consulted with legal advisors about guardianship processes, and planned to have me declared mentally unfit based on fabricated evidence of confusion. Mark's hands shook as he gripped the armrests of his chair. We just thought you might need help managing things. Help managing a net worth of $3.5 million plus 3 commercial units. My voice hardened. Help that required consulting advisors about emergency supervision protocols? Sarah stood abruptly. You're twisting everything. We love you. Love doesn't involve conspiracy, Sarah. Love doesn't involve researching how to steal someone's autonomy while they're still healthy and competent. Charles spoke quietly. Robert, the questions they asked were very specific. They knew legal terminology that most families never encounter unless they're planning something significant. Elizabeth nodded grimly. In my experience, legitimate family financial planning doesn't require research into mental capacity assessments. The room fell silent except for Mark's labored breathing. He looked at me with something approaching recognition, perhaps seeing for the first time the businessman who'd built the wealth they'd tried to steal. What happens now? He whispered. I stood, feeling every year of my age but also every ounce of my accumulated wisdom and experience. Now we discuss consequences. Consequences and the future. Consequences, I repeated, opening my desk drawer to retrieve the legal documents I'd prepared over the weekend. I'm changing my will immediately. My estate will go into an educational trust for Chloe, accessible when she turns 25. Mark leaned forward desperately. Dad, please. We made mistakes, but we can fix this. The trust will provide for her university education, postgraduate study if she chooses, and startup funds for whatever career path she selects. I spread the new will documents across my desk. Elizabeth, I need these witnessed and notarized. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. Robert, you can't do this to your own family. I'm protecting my family, I replied firmly, from parents who were willing to steal her grandfather's autonomy to fund their lifestyle. Elizabeth examined the documents professionally. Mr. Price, these terms are quite specific. There are conditions attached. If Mark and Sarah formally renounce all claims to my estate and demonstrate genuine change over the next year, I'll reconsider. But they must prove they've become the parents Chloe deserves. Charles nodded approvingly as he witnessed my signature. The educational trust structure is excellent. She'll have every opportunity you never got to provide directly. Mark buried his face in his hands. What does genuine change mean? How do we prove that? By getting employment that actually supports your family instead of depending on me. By prioritizing Chloe's happiness over your own financial desires. By showing me that my granddaughter matters more to you than my bank account. Sarah stood abruptly, her composure finally cracking completely. How are we supposed to live without your support? The same way millions of other families do. Through honest work and responsible spending. The condominium assistance ends today. The car payments stop immediately. You're both adults with college degrees. Figure it out. Elizabeth finished notarizing the documents with practiced efficiency. Everything is legally binding now. Mr. Price, you should keep these in a secure location. My solicitor will have copies by this afternoon, I assured her. After Elizabeth and Charles departed with handshakes and promises of discretion, the three of us sat in uncomfortable silence. Mark looked broken. Sarah appeared to be calculating survival strategies. Is there anything else you want to say? I asked. Mark met my eyes for the first time since the revelation began. I'm sorry, Dad. I know that doesn't fix anything. But I'm genuinely sorry. Sarah said nothing, which told me everything about her priorities. Words are cheap. Mark, actions over the next year will determine whether this family has a future together. 3 hours later, Chloe knocked on my door, her school backpack still slung over her shoulder. Grandpa, Mommy said you wanted to see me? I knelt to her eye level just as I had in the hallway 2 days ago. Come sit with me, sweetheart. We need to talk about some grown-up things. She settled beside me on the sofa, her 9-year-old wisdom already sensing something serious. Is this about what I told you? Partly. Your mommy and daddy made some poor choices about money, and there have to be consequences. But none of this changes how much I love you. Are they in trouble? They have to learn to take better care of themselves and you. But, Chloe, I want you to know that your future is completely secure. I've made special arrangements to make sure you can go to any university you want. Study anything that interests you. Her eyes brightened slightly. Even art school? That's really expensive, especially art school. And if you change your mind and want to be an architect or a teacher or start your own business, there will be money for that, too. What about Mommy and Daddy? They're going to work very hard to become better parents. And if they succeed, our family might be able to heal from this hurt. But even if they don't, you and I will always have each other. She hugged me tightly, and I felt Joyce's presence in that embrace. 3 generations of love continuing despite betrayal and broken trust. Can we look at university brochures? Chloe asked. I want to see what art schools look like. Absolutely, I smiled, reaching for my laptop. We have all the time in the world to plan your future. Outside, late spring was turning to early summer, and Joyce's rock garden flowers were finally beginning to bloom. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.